Shalom. On behalf of the Wolf family, I want to welcome and thank all of you for being here today. We remember Clifford Wolf and join our hearts together to give comfort and strength to the family. Mourning is a time filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. Clifford Wolf touched so many people's lives, and I think this is probably the most important time. And that's when we get a chance to kind of talk about Clifford, about his life, and about what he means and meant to us. And so at this time, we're going to hear words of remembrance and reflection. And I'm going to ask his son, Michael Wolf, if he would come up. Michael, come on.
What was it that defined our dad, set him apart? How did he see himself? I think Dad would have said the defining moments in his life were when he caught and married the love of his life, Lillian Lark. And following that, the 4 years he served as a soldier in the Second World War. As kids, we loved to tease him about both of those. We would satirize his war stories. There I was in Oslo, Italy. I bet you guys didn't know Oslo's in Italy. Jerry's to the left of us, crowds to the right of us. We used to tease him all the time. We made fun of how he used to use at least 5 terms of endearment anytime he addressed Mom. Lil, darling Ziskite, love of my life, angel. Would you please pass the salt? He worshipped Mom and was a hopeless romantic. Well, we mock what we are to become ourselves. I turned out to be exactly the same with Insun, my beautiful fiancée, who I'm marrying in just a few days. When Dad met Insun, he fell so deeply in love with her that I started to get the feeling that my attraction to her might be partly genetic. And to be sure, we must mention his corny jokes. The more we groaned, the more it encouraged him. It could have been very frustrating when Stephanie and I were kids and we asked him, "Dad, could we have that?" He said, "Sure." "Oh, you mean now?" "Oh, no, maybe someday, or, but you can have it, but not now." But his kidding around could also be comforting. One time I was working on an electronics project. That was my hobby when I was a kid. And I gave myself a tremendous electronic jolt that sent me flying up over the chair and landing on my back on the floor. It was so violent, the chair wasn't even knocked over. And I ran into the living room, my hands still smoking, and with an ashen complexion ran up to Dad and said, "Dad, I just nearly electrocuted myself." Well, he started a pun run that lasted about 10 minutes. He said, "What did you say?" "That's the most shocking thing I've ever heard. It's a good thing you were at home." And we who had ample time to tell me. I guess that's the current story, and, well, you get the idea. That went on. After about the 200th pun, I stopped being furious, and I had to laugh myself. And it turned out that he did comfort me, even though I never forgave him for all that. But all of those things are only one small part of the picture. He was a great soldier, but he hated war and aggression. He was proud of being an engineer and a meteorologist. But he was much more than a mathematician. He was a philosopher, a romantic, an artist. His fantasy knew no bounds. He invented tales of the squeegee orange, that's a little orange that only wanted to be eaten by good boys and girls. The stories were so nerve-wracking I could barely get to sleep afterwards. They would generally end with the orange, squeegee orange lying on the road, and a truck comes up and is just about to run over it. Okay, honey, I'll finish the story tomorrow. Good night. There were the endless adventures of Mr. McGillicuddy and Professor Noodlestrudel, and the invisible sign over the kitchen table that said, "No cheating." His humor was corny, but it was always motivated by affection. He never did it because he needed to be the center of attention. And he found something good in everyone. He knew no fear when he was meeting strangers, as many of you probably experienced firsthand. He felt compelled to talk to them. Even the shortest journey on an elevator would end with the doors opening, everyone in the elevator smiling, laughing, talking to each other, and half of them probably going on to becoming good friends. It came so naturally to Dad, he didn't even notice he was doing it. He just left a trail of smiling faces behind him. He, most of the time, never even noticed. He intensely loved children, and I think he never forgave Stephanie and me for growing up. And if it had been his choice, we probably would have had 8 brothers and sisters. But I can just hear what Mom would have said to that. Make them yourself, big shot. His last years of his life were difficult, very difficult. Not so much due to illness, but because after 67 years of marriage, he lost his wife, our mother, his soulmate, and he desperately missed her. He wanted nothing more than to lie next to his beloved and be with her for the rest of time. So this is not only a day of sadness, but also a time to celebrate the fulfillment of his deepest wish. If Dad could speak to us now, I'm sure he would just be trying to cheer us up and say something like, "I'm glad I was invited to the party." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And at this time, I would like to ask Clifford's daughter, Stephanie Morales, if she would come and share some thoughts.
So as you've already heard, we were blessed with a wonderful father. Everyone who met him was touched by his wit, his humor, his wisdom, his knowledge. Many have referred to the twinkle in his eye. He always seemed to be joyful and had unlimited affection for everyone. And of course, as my brother said, his jokes were notorious. With pretended wrath, he would exclaim, "Of all the unmitigated capriciousness." He told me I was a good daughter, and he didn't even have to pay me to be good. I was good for nothing. Wait a minute, that didn't come out right. He spoke of his youth walking with his uncle, and a pretty woman would walk by, and his uncle would remark to him, "Is she smiling at me or laughing at you?" And he pretty much picked that up and used it the rest of his life. He swore he had stopped telling jokes because people only laughed at him. We would go out to eat at a restaurant, our plates would be empty, and Dad would say, "I didn't like that at all." Family and friends alike have picked up these sayings, and we use them daily. We've even put some of them on T-shirts. As you've already heard, Dad was a weatherman, an engineer, a math teacher. His interest in weather was sparked when he was a young boy. He was fascinated by clouds. He never lost that fascination. He would sit at our breakfast area and look out the window and describe to me where the clouds had come from, where they were going, what kind they were, and whether it would rain or not. During World War II, my dad was a member of a frontline infantry weather observation unit, which spearheaded attacks. Our Wings Over Wendy's members know that he was still known as the Weather Warrior. He recorded and radioed code messages to air support groups. He participated in initial landings in Sicily, Italy, South France, cities like Salerno and Anzio. He remained on the front lines throughout the action. He was overseas 32 months with the famed 12th Tactical Air Command. He received special commendation and meritorious service plaques for gallantry in action. He confided in me once, though. I asked him, "Dad, how did you survive World War II? You were at the Kasserine Pass, you were at all these bloody battles." He said, because his grandma, my great-grandma, had taught him Torah. I believe God kept him safe throughout that war. Dad wrote letters home, which Rabbi Murray will later refer to, but they were witty, they were warm, they were history, they were culture. In the words of my cousin Glenn, who lives back east and couldn't come, those letters were museum quality. As he said, Uncle Cliff seemed to be making the best of a global catastrophe, never complaining. The letters also spoke of an extremely close family relationship with siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents that one doesn't see anymore. As the war progressed, I saw insights befitting a history professor. He spoke of Dad's quality of language, the insights, the angst, the impressions expressed in letters from one soldier caught up in the greatest cataclysm of the 20th century. Dad was a big flirt. Many of you know that. But he had tons of girlfriends, so to speak. But he remained faithful to only one woman, the love of his life, my mother Lillian. As was already mentioned, they were married for 67 years. My dad was also an artist, but his art was an avocation. You saw some of his paintings out in the lobby. He was amazingly talented. He used to share some of his technique secrets with me. That rumpled tablecloth on the still life gave it interest. Rocks that did not float in the water, but stayed on the bottom where they belonged, were another of his techniques. Best of all, my dad was a real family man, a good husband, a good father, a good uncle, a good grandfather. He used to, as my brother mentioned, he used to tell us bedtime stories. One that my brother didn't mention yet was the Bugs Bunny and Porky Pig ones. Porky always got into trouble, and then he had to yell in every story, "Bugs, help me." And of course, Michael mentioned their teacher, Professor Noodlestrudel. It goes on and on. What a fertile imagination. He loved the music of the 30s and 40s and knew all the lyrics. As his memory faded, he would start singing, falter for a minute, wait for the lyrics, and sure enough, they came back to him. If not at that moment, later in the day. As some of you know, I inherited that gift from him. My father, Clifford Wolf, had a heart full of love for family, friends, and acquaintances. What a remarkable man. I am so proud to have called him my dad, and I miss him.
Thank you, Stephanie. And at this time, I'm going to ask Rabbi Murray Silberling to come and share as well.
My mind actually began to think shortly before my eyes opened. My first sensation was the cold and the smell of mud. I suddenly realized where I was, Italy, 1943. I was in a foxhole by myself, damp, cold, covered with mud. I had been there 3 days watching the valley below for troop movements, observing the weather and sending coded messages back to headquarters. As an Army meteorologist, my job was to be the first one into an area to assess the weather for the best deployment of men, tanks, airplanes, etc. Several times an enemy platoon came close enough for me to hear men talking one to another. I would be so scared, but I don't think that I could have run even if I wanted to, because the mud was so thick on my shoes, although it did make me a little taller. I was so dirty, tired, and hungry that I longed for the minimal conditions of the base camp, the meals of Spam stew, the chicken wire mesh bed with mattress filled with camel straw. I especially enjoyed the 5 blankets, 1 under me, 1 for a pillow, and 3 covering me. How snugly it seemed to me now. I had started out in Africa in 1942 with a large group of soldiers from the United States and Britain to stop Rommel's march from Libya to Algiers. We were so young and ill-prepared, following new, inexperienced officers. We met Rommel in the infamous Kasserine Pass. It was the most bloody, horrific battle of the war yet. But he was finally stopped there. So many of my friends died. So many of them were wounded in that battle. I knew that we were on the offensive now, and that France and Germany would be next for me. First one in, the meteorologist. This was my service for God and country, to do my duty and trust God to be able to make it home after the war. Just as a young kid from Brooklyn, I only had one thing to really go home for, my lovely Lillian. We met through a friend just before I shipped overseas. I wasn't sure if she really loved me, but I wasn't going to take no for an answer. Lots of chutzpah. We wrote each other often, and sometimes I got a little mushy. Can I read to you one of my letters? I have it here. Dear Lillian, I received your picture today. I couldn't stop looking at it. It was truly lovely. to say that your loveliness portrays itself to a degree far surpassing all I have always believed it to be is in itself an understatement. I can't imagine how you could feel that anyone else can resemble you. Fortunate would she be, but who could possess the personality and character that you do? Winning the war and getting home to start a new life is my sole obsession. Having you waiting at the station, running up to share an embrace is a delightful thought. This letter is unlike any I've ever written to you. After our short discussion, I went away feeling so good that I decided not to leave out my opinions and my feelings. I want to thank you sincerely for the grand photo. It has exceeded all expectations as a maker of joy in my life. As always, Cliff. For those of you who know the rest of the story, and much of it we have heard today, Cliff came home in 1945. He was married to Lillian 3 months after returning. He went to New York University, became an engineer, later to become a math teacher, and as you see out in the front, to become an artist. After moving to California, he took many positions in order to raise his family with such love. Cliff was a man who served God, country, and his family. In his later years at Beth Emunah, Cliff brought such joy and his spirit of love to our community. 4.5 years ago, here in this place, his lovely Lillian, after passing away, was put to rest. I'll never forget that day. Cliff could hardly hold himself back from joining her there in that grave. I remember people holding him. He wanted to be with her and nothing else in his life. But now, as was said, he is reunited with her in the presence of the Lord, his master saying to him these words, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter now into the joy of your master." Alav Hashalom, Cliff.
Thank you, Rabbi Murray. Stephanie, Michael, Ben, Andy, Laura, and family, and friends of Clifford Wolf, I am thankful that we are all here together to support the Wolf and Morales extended families. I know that each of you is deeply saddened by the loss of Clifford. He had a special place in our hearts, and he will be greatly missed. Often it is difficult to know what words to express, because words have their limitations. What we can't express with our words, we can with our presence. I'd like to thank each of you here today. It means so much to the family that you are all here. Thank you for your supportive presence. And as was said, and I'm going to repeat a few things, but Clifford was born on April 14th, 1919 in Brooklyn, New York. Met and married the love of his life, Lillian. They met in college when he was walking down a corridor, and he noticed Lillian speaking in a classroom. He was immediately smitten, and it was love at first sight for Clifford. She waited for him until he came back from the war. She also told him that she would not marry him unless he finished college and secured a job. Such good advice. They were married in 1945, and as the story is told, Clifford had a final exam on the morning of their wedding day. And as has been said, they were married for 67 years until her passing. Clifford and Lillian moved to Van Nuys, California in 1957, and in 1971 he moved to Oakwood in Woodland Hills, where he lived for the remainder of his life, most of the remainder of his life. Clifford and Lillian had 2 children who are present today, Stephanie and Michael. Clifford had 2 sisters, Marilyn, Betty, and a brother, Ira, and grandchildren, which include Sophie and Marlene. Clifford was an amazing person. In many ways, he was bigger than life. He was an accomplished weatherman, an aeronautical engineer, math teacher at Adventist High, naturalist and artist with amazing talent. And it has been said, some of his paintings are out in the foyer. He had a brilliant mind and a sharp wit. He was a philosopher and was caring and brave. He was a soldier in the 12th Tactical Air Command Weather Squadron and served his country with distinction during World War II. He served in North Africa, Italy, Sicily, France, and towards the end of the war in Germany. He participated in the first Passover celebration in Germany since the beginning of the Holocaust. He participated and survived the Battle of Kasserine in 1942, in which many brave soldiers lost their lives. One of Clifford's favorite quotes was, "There are no problems, only challenges." Clifford lived through the Depression and couldn't even afford a pair of shoes. His shoes were worn, and he would pad them with cardboard. One day he went out and shined shoes to make some money. He could only shine shoes that were black because he only had black shoe polish. That particular day he made $2.50. A lot of money at that time. Could almost buy a house. And gave a nickel of it to a young girl that was selling pencils. The rest he gave to his mom, and that night they were able to have a steak dinner. His son Michael remembers a time when he was playing in an orchestra, and abruptly the season was canceled. His father's response was, "Blessings come in strange disguises." This response was amazingly prophetic, because Michael received an invitation to go to Austria to work with the Austrian Music Council. And Michael sees this as a pivotal event in his life. This led to his living and working in Europe as a concert double bassist. And currently he is a professor at the Berlin Conservatory of Music. I personally have fond memories of Clifford sitting in the front row of our synagogue with his daughter Stephanie and his son-in-law Ben. He was always exceptionally friendly, cheerful, and as you know, he would always tell a joke or two. A man is measured by the impact he has on others. All your presence here today demonstrates this. A man is also measured by the legacy he leaves behind. Stephanie and Michael, each of you continue this legacy by pursuing your passions, whether it be knowledge, music, or your passion for God. Whatever it is, I know he was proud of you. He lived a wonderful, full life. He lived every one of his 98 years to the best that he could. And I see it as a true privilege to have known him. He earned our respect and admiration, and his memory will remain in our hearts forever. Amen. And at this time, the family would like me to open it up for anyone that would like to share maybe a thought or an idea, a story, a joke, something from your experience, your connection with Clifford Wolf. Anyone that would like to come, please come at this time.
In my eyes, Cliff was a wonderful man. I got to know him in our meeting at Wings Over Wendy's when his daughter Stephanie introduced me to him. He always had a smile ready for me. And every time I went to speak to him, I said, "You know, Cliff, every time I speak to you, you seem to be in a cloud all the time." I didn't realize he was a meteorologist. I always waved to him, and he waved back. I gave him the high sign from my position in the table I was sitting at, and he was sitting by the window. and he was having his coffee and his donut, I just raised my thumb up into my high sign, and he always gave me one back. But I'll never forget his smile. We lost a good friend. And God bless him, and God bless everyone here today. Amen.
Thank you.
Well, I met Clifford at Betumana, and he always sat in the front row. And from day one, he pulled me over. And no offense to anybody, he said, "You know, the reason I come here is to hear you play piano." And from that moment on, I just love that man. And he introduced me to his family. And every week since then, I'd look down from the piano to make sure he was there. And when he wasn't there, it was always very sad for me. I was always asking Stephanie, "Where's my man?" I knew from the outset, from his, not just from his stories, but just from his personality, that was a good man. And I immediately just loved him and respected him and honored him. I just felt this deep sense of honor for the man because his goodness just came out. It was just there, and I knew he was good. And his jokes, even the same ones over and over again, made me laugh. And and to be honest, also when he was there and listening, my heart, I was playing to him. I always played to him. I just would see him there, and I always feel that the best of my playing, or people would compliment me, were the days that he was sitting there, and in my heart I was playing to Clifford, and I will miss him.
Thank you, Gary. Anyone else?
As you heard, Lil and Cliff moved out to California in 1957. Prior to that, I think they lived in Lodi, New Jersey, and so we would take trips from where we lived on Long Island to go there, and I just remembered them with great fondness. We get into the car, and it seemed like forever. At some point, we would stop, and I would have chicken pot pie at some diner somewhere, and the memory of getting carried into the house after I'd fallen asleep was wonderful. So in 1959, my mother took my brother and myself out to California. Her marriage with my father was not a happy one, and he was not an easy man to get to know. And Uncle Cliff, God bless, he had the biggest heart, became another father. And the house was always full of love, and we were always welcome. And I am so grateful for that, despite his corny jokes.
Murray mentioned knowing all the words to songs. One year at Barbara and Hal's 4th of July party, my sister and father came, and she brought her guitar. My father now has Alzheimer's. But at that party, she started playing Sidewalks of New York. They said he was from Brooklyn. My dad was from Brooklyn. The two of them knew all the words and were singing it. And he was a great flirt, definitely.
Thank you, Andrea.
Yes. My name's Larry Baum. Cliff was a very good friend of my father's, Fred Baum. And They met each other when he was teaching in Venice High School. My father also taught math, and they were in the same department. So I've known Cliff since about 14. I was about 14 when I met him because he came over, and I just started high school. So anyway, I want to give some honor to Cliff, something that he did something for me, and I want to let everybody know about that. I got a degree in music. I always wanted to be really big in professional music. That was my aspiration. But reality, it's very difficult, so I had to choose to become a teacher, to make a living. And at Venice High School, I taught choral music there and other courses, piano. And it started to get very discouraging to me as a couple of years went by. It was very difficult, and it was just not what I wanted. And I started actually becoming a little bit, discouraged about it. So I was in the cafeteria one day. My father, I got a job there later at Venice High. My father kind of talked to the principal and got me in there. So in the cafeteria, I was expressing a lot of grief about teaching music, and I actually was talking about giving it up, just giving up music altogether and doing another career. That's how discouraged I was. And I stormed out of the cafeteria. I was really upset. I was mad, and I walked out of the cafeteria. It was lunchtime and went back to my classroom. Well, here's the story. Cliff followed me from the cafeteria all the way back to my classroom. I wasn't expecting that. He barged into my room and he went up and he says, "I could really hit you." He says, "You're not going to give up music. It's very important to you, and you should not give it up." And so, ever since then, I've done a lot of other things, but, as far as teaching, I taught math also, science, but every time I decided to go and take music seriously, which I do to the present day, a lot of it I owe to Cliff, because he really encouraged me to stay with it. So I want to let everybody know that.
Thank you very much. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember Cliff. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember Clifford. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember Clifford. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember Clifford. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember Clifford. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember Clifford. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember Clifford. So long as we live, he shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. El Malay Rachamim, O God full of compassion, please send your comfort to those who grieve. Help them to dispel the sadness that accompanies the pain of loss, and to find joy in the precious memories of Clifford Wolf. May your love inspire them to focus on the love they had for Clifford and that Clifford had for them. Help them to face the future with courage, to treasure Clifford's wonderful legacy. Sustain us in our faith, O God, even in this troubling time, as you have sustained our people in times of sorrow and trouble throughout the generations. Blessed are you, Adonai, who provides comfort to the broken-hearted.